Somewhere above your head on this flight, behind a door disguised as an overhead bin, there may be a bed, and someone legally responsible for landing this aircraft may be asleep in it right now. On most flights over roughly 8 hours, at least one pilot, often an entire second crew, is required by law to be resting, not flying. This is not a hidden luxury. It is a federal mandate. The answer involves a regulation shaped by a crash outside Buffalo, a staircase disguised as a broom closet, a 4-pilot roster built around the science of jet lag, and an industry that decided the only way to outmaneuver biology was to build a bedroom into an airplane. The human body operates on a strict 24-hour cycle, an internal clock that cannot be reprogrammed by a shift schedule or a change in time zone. At the heart of this biology is a physiological dip that the Federal Aviation Administration defines as the window of circadian low. Occurring between 2 a.m. and 5:59 a.m. home base time, this window is when the body's natural drive for sleep peaks and core body temperature and alertness drop. To understand this drop, the brain's processing power can be compared to a phone running on a low battery saving mode. During these pre-dawn hours, reaction times slow and cognitive performance declines, regardless of a pilot's training or years of experience. It is a hard biological ceiling. These hidden sleeping compartments do not serve as a luxury. Instead, they are an engineering response to this biological reality. Because human biology cannot be modified, aviation safety rules must build around it. How did federal safety rules change to address these biological limits? The modern safety system operates on a simple premise: pilot fatigue always wins. To understand why, one must look at the human brain during an extended duty day. Cognitive performance does not degrade in a straight line. Instead, it follows a steep curve. After 16 hours of continuous wakefulness, the brain suffers a drop in alertness that mirrors the disorientation of severe jet lag or working back-to-back night shifts. In the cockpit, this biological decline cannot be overcome by sheer focus. Willpower alone cannot override the chemical signals demanding sleep, and caffeine only masks exhaustion temporarily without restoring actual cognitive capacity. When a flight spans 18 hours, there is no engineering trick or scheduling adjustment that can prevent the onset of fatigue. The human body simply cannot obey a flight plan. This reality forced a compromise in aircraft design. Airlines realized they could not train pilots to stay awake forever, nor could they schedule their way out of biology. To operate these routes, carriers had to surrender revenue-generating space to install dedicated, quiet sleeping areas. But how does a regulator define a safe space? Sleep inside a pressurized cabin at 40,000 feet. On February 12, 2009, a Bombardier Q400 operating as Colgan Air Flight 3407 crashed during an instrument approach near Buffalo, New York, resulting in 50 fatalities. The subsequent National Transportation Safety Board investigation did not merely examine mechanical systems or pilot actions in the final seconds. It exposed a critical, systemic vulnerability in commercial aviation: pilot fatigue. The inquiry focused heavily on the off-duty habits and commutes of the crew, particularly First Officer Rebecca Shaw. Before reporting for the flight, Shaw had traveled overnight on a cargo flight from her home in Seattle to the Newark hub, spanning 3 time zones. Lacking a local base or affordable lodging on a starting regional airline salary, she spent the hours before her duty period resting on a couch in a busy Newark crew room. She had been awake for nearly 24 hours before the flight encountered icy conditions and entered an aerodynamic stall. Her schedule was not an anomaly, but a reflection of industry-wide economic pressures. Regional pilots routinely managed exhausting multi-leg shifts and long commutes without access to dedicated quiet rest facilities at airport hubs. The National Transportation Safety Board officially cited fatigue as a contributing factor in the crash, concluding that sleep deprivation severely degraded the crew's cognitive performance and delayed their stall recovery. Exhaustion was no longer a personal choice. It was a systemic hazard. Tragedy had forced fatigue into the official accident record. How did this disaster compel regulators to fundamentally reshape the rules of aviation safety? The congressional answer was the Airline Safety and FAA Extension Act of 2010. This legislative mandate forced the Federal Aviation Administration to abandon outdated scheduling limits and draft a new, science-based framework. The result was 14 CFR, Part 117, which became effective on January 4, 2014. Part 117 completely restructured commercial aviation by replacing employer goodwill with enforceable operating math. Under these regulations, a pilot's maximum daily flight duty period is no longer a static number. Instead, it is a dynamic limit calculated using the exact hour the pilot reports for work and the total number of flight segments scheduled. Much like a rigid financial budget where every single dollar is strictly accounted for, the new regulatory system treats human alertness as a finite resource that depletes predictably. There is no room for negotiation. If the math does not balance, the aircraft simply does not fly. This shift meant that airlines could no longer rely on scheduling tricks to keep flights moving. But how does this mathematical budget translate into the physical layout of an airliner? Part 117 restructured aviation safety, but its boundaries did not protect every cockpit. The FAA limited the scope of these science-based rules exclusively to passenger-carrying operations. Cargo carriers remained under older, more permissive legacy rules, a policy gap known as the cargo carve-out. The consequences of this division became clear on August 14, 2013. UPS Flight 1354, an Airbus A300 cargo jet, crashed short of the runway in Birmingham, Alabama, killing both pilots. The National Transportation Safety Board cited pilot fatigue as a factor. Because it was an all-cargo flight, the crew operated under the older regulatory framework, lacking the safety protections of the new duty limits. The new rules modernized one sector of aviation, but left another operating under outdated math. Under FAA Advisory Circular 117-1, the regulator does not simply require rest in the abstract, it grades the quality of the sleeping environment. Working with the engineering guidelines in SAE-ARP 41013, the agency establishes three distinct tiers. A Class 1 facility is the highest standard. This is a dedicated, temperature-controlled compartment physically isolated from the passenger cabin, featuring a completely flat bunk and high-grade acoustic ceiling to keep sound below 70 decibels. It functions like a quiet, private bedroom. A Class 2 facility drops to a semi-lie-flat seat reclining to at least 90 degrees, typically separated from passengers only by a heavy curtain. Think of it as a standard first-class pod. A Class 3 facility offers the least protection, requiring only a cabin seat with a 40-degree recline and leg support, similar to a premium economy seat. The grade of the space determines the legal limit of the duty day. Better sleep translates directly into longer flights. How does an airline physically squeeze these engineering standards into a pressurized metal tube? Wide-body airliners like the Boeing 777 or Airbus A330 were engineered to maximize revenue-generating volume. Every cubic foot of internal space is optimized for cargo containers below deck and passenger seats above. To build a dedicated sleeping room, engineers must physically subtract space from these sellable areas. It is the equivalent of a homeowner trying to add a spare bedroom by shrinking their living room. To minimize this financial penalty on shorter long-haul routes lasting 9 to 13 hours, airlines often choose the Class 3 rest option. Instead of constructing an entirely new room, they designate a standard cabin seat with 40 degrees of recline and foot support. It requires zero structural modifications, but it offers minimal isolation. How does the choice of rest facility alter the legal limits of a pilot's working day? Under 14 CFR Part 117, the FAA regulates this trade-off through a legal framework called augmented operations. By adding a third or fourth pilot to the crew, airlines can legally operate flights past standard shift limits, provided those extra pilots have a designated place to sleep while their colleagues fly. The regulation does not treat all rest equally, and instead it uses a strict mathematical formula where the quality of the onboard rest facility determines the length of the working day. To see this formula in action, look at Table C of Part 117, which dictates the maximum flight duty period for augmented crews. If a 3-pilot crew reports for a flight at 9 in the morning, their allowable duty time depends entirely on the physical bunk installed. If the aircraft features a Class 1 private bunk, the crew can legally work for up to 17 hours. If the airline downgrades that space to a Class 2 seat with a heavy curtain, the legal duty limit drops to 16.5 hours. If they install only a Class 3 premium economy seat, the limit drops further to 15 hours. A 2-hour difference in legal flight limits is decided solely by where the pilots sleep. It is the regulatory equivalent of earning a tax credit. The higher the quality of the accommodation, the more duty hours the airline is allowed to claim. By tying duty limits directly to physical comfort, the FAA writes rest quality into flight duty math. But how do aircraft manufacturers physically construct these classified sleeping quarters inside a pressurized aluminum tube? For airlines, the decision to install these compartments is a matter of strict balance sheets. Every cubic foot dedicated to pilot bunks is space that cannot hold revenue-producing passenger seats or cargo containers. On a long-haul aircraft, surrendering this real estate costs millions of dollars in lost ticket sales over the life of the airframe. Yet the alternative is far more costly. Without certified rest areas, ultra-long-haul routes become legally impossible to fly under modern duty regulations. Beyond regulatory compliance, the potential cost of a single fatigue-related accident, measured in legal liabilities, lost hull value, and ruined brand trust, dwarfs any lost passenger revenue. You cannot eliminate fatigue on an 18-hour route, so you build the airplane around it. The sleeping cabin is the physical price of safety. How do manufacturers physically carve out a quiet bedroom from a pressurized cylinder designed solely for revenue? Since early wide-body airframes were never engineered with crew sleep in mind, aerospace firms had to develop retrofitted structural solutions. For the Airbus A330 and A340, Collins Aerospace designed dedicated flight crew rest compartments. These self-contained structures feature high-grade acoustic insulation and 16 G-rated jump seats, certified for taxi, takeoff, and landing. It is the aerospace equivalent of installing a crash-tested, soundproof micro-apartment inside a commercial shipping container. On newer aircraft, engineers looked upward. The Boeing 787, Airbus A350, and Boeing 747-8 utilize crown-mounted rest modules. These compartments occupy the vacant space between the passenger cabin ceiling and the outer fuselage skin, effectively transforming an unused attic into a functional sleeping zone without sacrificing a single row of passenger seats. However, elevating pilots above the cabin introduces complex safety requirements. In the Boeing 777, overhead bunk modules are engineered with a secondary emergency escape hatch. This architectural compromise ensures that if a primary entryway is blocked during an emergency, the sleeping crew has an alternate pathway to exit. Safety regulations dictate every square inch of the design. How does the immense cost of surrendering this valuable real estate shape airline economics? Singapore Airlines manages this economic balance on the world's longest scheduled non-stop service between Singapore and New York, a flight lasting nearly 19 hours. To run this route safely, the carrier relies on a heavy crew roster of 4 pilots. Under this system, 2 pilots sleep in a Class 1 overhead bunk, while the other 2 fly. This is the aviation equivalent of a long road trip where drivers take turns at the wheel, while others sleep in the back. The schedule is structured around circadian biology, rotating the crew to ensure that alert eyes are always at the controls during landing. This operational model serves as the blueprint for Qantas's upcoming Project Sunrise. Using a custom Airbus A350-1000 ULR, Qantas plans to launch direct flights connecting Sydney to London and New York, pushing flight times past 20 hours. The aircraft features a quiet crew rest zone with individual bunks and a physical wellness area. What once was an engineering afterthought is now a structural requirement for the future of flight. To follow the engineering behind global travel, subscribe to the channel. Even with strict legal limits, rules only govern a pilot's scheduled shift. They do not control what happens before report time. For reserve pilots, the phone can ring at any hour, demanding immediate transit from restful sleep to a complex cockpit. Many flight crews commute hundreds of miles by air or car just to reach their assigned base before their official duty clock even starts. This unpaid, unregulated travel eats away at essential rest windows long before takeoff. When global airline timetables run on continuous 24-hour schedules, they inevitably collide with a human body that remains bound to a daylight cycle. Safety margins can be engineered into fuselages and written into law, but can a regulation really account for every commute? To address these human limits, airlines are turning from rigid historic timetables to predictive fatigue modeling software. These programs analyze sleep history, circadian cycles, and flight schedules to calculate safety risk scores before a pilot ever steps on board, functioning like an early warning system for human exhaustion on 22-hour flights. While the Airline Pilots Association presses for these advanced protections to become the universal standard, the reality remains uneven. Most of the global aviation fleet still operates under legacy math, where crew rest is treated as a scheduling variable rather than a biological necessity. As long-haul boundaries push further, the industry continues to debate where the line between economic efficiency and human endurance must be drawn. Can engineering and software truly neutralize the biological cost of flight? As aviation pushes deeper into ultra-long-haul territory, the ultimate constraint is no longer fuel, but human endurance. Those hidden berths are not a luxury. They are a hard-won regulatory shield against the limits of circadian biology. They prove that while technology can fly indefinitely, the human brain still runs on a 24-hour clock. Subscribe for more engineering and safety insights.